My name is Wang. I'm the Vice President of Capital Markets and Corporate Development of Canaan Inc. with a ticker CAN. Joining me today is Bradley Garrone from ValueHash. Could you introduce your firm, yourself?
My role at ValueHash is Director of Power Origination. I basically deal with the strategy around how do we develop a site from the ground up. We need to make sure we secure the land. We need to make sure we secure the power. I also deal with the day-to-day aspects of the economics of the procurement of the power. We have 3 sites all across the United States right now, a site in New York, site in Nebraska, and then also in Kansas. That's sort of like a high-level look at our business. And in particular, what does the business do? We're basically a Bitcoin mining hosting business. If you happen to be a customer that is looking for a one-stop shop to acquire miners, upgrade your miners, and not even really have to take possession of them, you can buy the miners. We put them on the racks. You sign a deal. It's designed to be as clean and as hands-off as possible.
In terms of securing land, I know a lot of people are competing against each other to get power.
Yeah.
And power is getting more and more scarce.
Yes.
With competition from AIHPC, by the way.
Yeah.
So how do you manage to get more power and cheaper power from customers?
What you're really dealing with there is a system of multiple constraints. So imagine you have a checklist of, I need this, I need A, B, C, D, E, and F, right? So what do you need? You need enough land. Okay, well, there's land everywhere. You drive across the country, there's plenty of open spaces. Okay, well, now the subset is this big. Well, where can I get power? Then you have certain sub-questions that come into play then. Okay, well, you might drive down the road, you might see a substation. That substation might not have any headroom left available. All the juice might be used up in that substation. So that tends to lead to a conversation where you might have to inquire with the utility and you might have to ask some questions. There's also different services that you can pay for to give you visibility into different substations across the United States. There's the physical portion of the power component that I just talked about, but then it's not just enough to have the megawatts. You need to have competitive pricing on those megawatts.
Exactly.
So that's a whole different conversation. And that's another part of my role, is doing that kind of research to where it's not just a matter of getting the power. Can I get the power, and is it economically competitive? And then you mentioned about AI, like them buying up land, like GPU type data centers. Then you also have the fiber component. So the fiber is adding an additional constraint on top of the availability of the power and the economics of the power.
So it really depends on the application itself.
It depends on the application itself. And one thing that we're exploring with the growth in AI GPUs, we're trying to approach this from we have our core business, which is developing BTC sites for hosting and so forth. We're continuing with that trend. We're continuing with our business, but now we have an extra sort of birdie on our shoulder talking well, a new site that we develop, this might be a better fit for an AI player as opposed to Bitcoin mining, but we still do the core business. There's just an extra level of optionality that we have to contend with now.
Yeah. Wow, that's great. So we know United States has a multi-layer regulatory system. We have federal level, state level, county level.
Yes.
And there are more. So when you try to do work for your customer and acquire land and power, do you regularly deal with people who are not that much of knowledge about Bitcoin? Do you do the education, trying to kind of make them more aligned to you?
I understand what you're getting at there. And the simple answer is, yes, there is a certain amount of sometimes education you have to do. Our philosophy at ValueHash is fairly straightforward. We identify a site through internal research. And then just because we've identified a candidate site, that doesn't mean the deal is going to work out. There's a certain degree of what I call rubbing elbows and kissing babies. You have to go to the town. This is where I'm a big fan of face-to-face interaction. You need to go to the town. You need to express interest, make multiple visits to the site, and say, we are serious about developing this kind of project. Be very transparent. You lay everything on the table. You say, in order for this to work, we're going to need, A, B, C, and D. And we find that if we show up in person and we're very deliberate about our intentions, that the deal ultimately can get from point A to point Z and ultimately come to completion. You mentioned about the federal versus the state versus the local. In general, we're not dealing with anybody from the federal government, but there are certain rules that we kind of have to have in the back of our minds. So the federal government is kind of the grand overseer, but don't give them a reason to kind of ask questions kind of thing. So you just play by the rules and you do things deliberately throughout the whole process. And then at the state level, it really isn't so much of a state level thing as what RTO you happen to be under. So for example, in New York, that's overseen by New York ISO. If you happen to have an operation in Ohio or Pennsylvania or New Jersey or Maryland or Washington, D.C., that's overseen by PJM. We have sites in Nebraska and Kansas. That RTO, Regional Transmission Organization, is called SPP, Southwest Power Pool. So that's the one particular ISO that I tend to have the most experience with, just from having dealt with them. And in the meantime, since I've joined ValueHash.
ValueHash is an operation, a joint team effort, right? So
Yes.
you are in charge of acquiring land and origination of
Yes.
few projects. Tell me about your organization. And
Yeah, absolutely. Yash Milak is our CEO. His brother, Shrey Nuj, who I refer to as Shrey, he's our COO. Yash is sort of like the brains behind the operation, deciding like, well, should we go forward with this deal or not go forward with this particular deal? Shrey, the COO, he does more of the back office accounting kind of stuff. He also runs the dispatching of the miners and so on and so forth. I wear a few different hats, whether it's assisting in land acquisition, whether it be a lease or like a purchase of the particular land. And then also there's the power component that we already talked about. And then there's the day-to-day operations of what's the economic strategy to get as competitive electricity rates as possible so that we can deliver more value to our customers. That's sort of from the top down, but I'd be remiss if I didn't state like the value of our team of, we have a site manager at each one of our sites, and then there's employees who work for the site manager, making sure that the day-to-day work of, are the miners running, or any sort of repairs that go on, it's things as simple as making sure that the site looks presentable for site visits whenever we have potential clients coming to the site. We also have a 24/7 ops team to be able to send out notifications to customers. So it really takes a whole team to enable this to really work.
And you're in 3 states. Are you constantly looking? Are you trying to expand into other states? What are the target states?
Absolutely. So it really kind of depends, because everything really comes down to the economics of making sure that the business is viable. As far as we're talking about in the United States, we're willing to really go anywhere. Now, there's certain states during different period of times where there might be a better opportunity in one state versus another. It might have to do with like local regulations or a local law that gets passed, or it might have to do with, for example, if you go to West Texas, there's a lot of wind energy, but maybe there's a potential for a behind the meter deal. Maybe if you have side partners that are willing to put CapEx into putting natural gas fire generators on site, and you're able to mine some flare gas. We're not currently in that, but we're looking for particular opportunities like that. There's a whole host of opportunities, right? And it's really a matter of, kind of developing the relationships. I'm big on something that I call the quote unquote fuzzy feeling. I want to have the fuzzy feeling after I talk to somebody. And I hope the people that I interact with, they in turn also have that fuzzy feeling. So it's really all about laying on expectations and then getting down to brass tacks, like what are the numbers, and following through on a particular deal. So we will go anywhere. And whether it's a grid-fed opportunity where the power contract is just right, or whether it's, okay, we're not even going to connect to the grid and we're going to figure out a deal to be able to do it that way. So all of the above we're open to. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for coming by, Brad.
Absolutely.